Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Amazon Ads Raw. And today we are talking about something that I have not thought about, I need to talk about, but I feel it's actually very helpful if we talk about this. Today we talk about the target ACOS and how to define it. Because the reason why I'm doing this video is pretty simple. Some weeks ago, somebody posted on Amazon, on LinkedIn, hey, this is really simple how we do our bidding. You just need your you just need your conversion rate and this and that, and then you can calculate your ideal bid. And I was like, wait a second, but how do you calculate your target ACOS then? And he replied and said, well, for target ACOS, you just need this and that and your target TACOS. And I was like, okay, and how do I define my target TACOS? And you see where it goes. Sometimes it's not that simple. People always say, hey, you need to set a ACOS target, right? Most bidding tools work with an ACOS target on a child ASIN level. Now, the biggest question is, how do you define actually that target ACOS? And I would think that most sellers are doing this actually wrong, or they do it, let's say, without kind of thinking about all the implications that are necessary. So let's try to work towards a target ACOS methodology. There's different approaches you can use, and I personally also use all of them in certain environments. So let's start really simple here with the most and easiest solution you can do for defining your target ACOS. Let's assume we have 5 products. We have product A, B, C, D, E, and we have 3 parents. Product A is a single child-parent combination, product B the same, and then we have product C, D, E, they're all in a parent. This will be important because there's some nuances to ASINs in a parent. Now, let's define some margin. And what I mean with margin here is gross margin before ads, right? So this is your gross margin before ads, or, your price minus your COGS minus your whatever, Amazon fees, and so on and so forth. This ranges from 30, 35, 25, 22 to 20. Hopefully your margins are higher. If not, don't worry. Now, there's a few things how you can define your target ACOS. Some people just do, hey, my target ACOS is 20. Everything is 20. Obviously, you'll see already from different margins that setting the same target ACOS for every child will be not ideal. Some will receive with a 20% target, not so much room to be producing additional profits, and some will have a little bit more room. So what we do here is we can use some sort of multiplier, right? With a multiplier on top of our margin, we can leverage the margin profiles. And why is this important? Because your margins do change. When do your margins change? Your margins will always change when your price changes, or when you buy new inventory and you buy more this time. You get better costs of goods sold. Instead of 1,000 units, you buy 2,000, and instead of $3.50, you paid $3.25. This means another 25 cents of additional margin for you, or a couple of percent depending on your product price. Now, why is this important? Because if your margins go up, you might want to invest more into ads. If your margins go down, you might want to invest less into ads. So that's why it's important to have your gross margins before ads somewhere dynamically adjusted, and take this value as a base start for your calculations. Now, you don't have to work just with your margins. What I like to do is also add a few more things than just margins. But let's assume you just want to do margins for now. Then a simple way you can set a multiplier on the margin. And this multiplier can be 1, so 100%. And then your target ACOS will be very simple, the same like your margin, right? The target ACOS for this is 30, 35, and so on and so forth. What does it mean if you hit this ACOS as well? Like you said with your margin, it doesn't mean you're unprofitable. It only means if you hit that ACOS with that margin, your PPC is break even. So each PPC sale is making zero profit. You're only profiting from all the organic sales in that scenario. Typically, what sellers are looking for is they want to make profit with the organics, but they also want to make profit with PPC. That's why typically you would see something like, hey, I'll set a little lower multiplier on my margin. If I can reach that ACOS for that product, I'm still making 6% margin on each PPC sale plus the additional margin dollars from the organic revenue that this ASIN is getting. Now, this multiplier can be adjusted based on your needs, right? Let's think about this. If you're in a ranking situation, you want to aggressively rank for the season or for whatever, maybe you want to be a little bit more aggressive, right? You set your multiplier to 1.2. This means, and let's always assume in this exercise here that your target ACOS is also your realized ACOS. And if you're doing advertising, you know target ACOS and realized ACOS is two distinct things. And not always you will hit your target ACOS with your realized ACOS. But let's assume this is the case. Then what does it mean if we set a multiplier higher than 1? It means that we will lose 6% of margin on each PPC sale. So each PPC sale will produce already a negative profit. Now, hopefully, I have enough organic sales that I'm still getting positive profit. But maybe it's okay for ranking initiative for a week or two to go below my margins on a total global level. Maybe that's all right. So this is where, these multipliers come into place. And there are certain, things that you want to eventually use that. I'll give you another example on how you can leverage these multipliers in an additional context. So typically what I like to do is to look at your days of supply. So your inventory. How many days of supply do I have from this ASIN? And now it gets interesting because if I'm only having 14 days of inventory, meaning in 2 weeks I'm out of stock, do I really want to still push at 24% target ACOS? Or do I maybe want to slow down already a little bit my PPC investments? The tricky part is that typically, if you're low on inventory and you know that in 2 weeks you don't have another stock hitting Amazon, another inventory truck, whatever, you will increase prices, right? So here it gets really tricky that people will increase the price. Let's say the seller increases the price. When you have a very reactive, very dynamic system, then with increased prices, also your margins go up. If your margins go up and you're not changing anything, then your target ACOS will go up. With more target ACOS, you will spend more. So the system would push for more. That's why when prices go up in a scenario with low days of supply, so you actually want to slow down the velocity, you need to have some sort of dynamic target ACOS adjustment that will, reflect of that. So what I've done here is I used another multiplier on the initial target ACOS. So if my days of supply are low, and you can define that, right? So there you can define it. Typically what I do, everything below 14 days is about to run out of stock. So let's slow it down. Everything between 14 and 90 days, let's say this is like the normal healthy inventory situation, we keep it at 1%, right? So we don't change anything with our target ACOS, but everything above 180 days is long-term storage, and we want to increase our PPC. Typically, we also want to reduce our price. So have this in mind, that again, there's like a double dip happening. So a double dip can happen if both price and target ACOS are moving in the same directions, right? Price is going up to slow down velocity, but also PPC investment is going up to push again velocity. Then you have a problem. The same as when you want to decrease price for higher velocity on those long-term items. and because a lower price has lower margins, and then again, I'm getting a lower target ACOS, meaning I'm investing less, and that will again not work. So have this in mind. This is very important to understand. So what you can do here, let's say this is our days of supply. Days of supply at Amazon. When you go into inventory, there's not just one days of supply. You have days of supply at Amazon. You have days of supply in transit. Eventually, you even have days of supply, in the whole kind of supply chain. Maybe there's something on the water. Maybe there's something on a truck already from a 3PL to Amazon. The interesting thing to work with inventory data is not just to work with the data from Amazon on hand, but also beyond that. Because maybe those 14 days look scary, but if there's a truck already inbounding at Amazon and we are sure in 2 weeks there's there's enough supply, then I don't need to throttle. I don't need to pull it back, right? Anyways, let's go back to the drawing board here and let's talk through how that works, right? Let's assume we're not changing our prices and we just adjust based on the days of supply. So 14 days low, we want to reduce our PPC investment. We want to get a little bit more profitable. We want to slow down the velocity. So instead of 24% ACOS target, our ACOS target goes down to 17, right? In this situation, it stays the same. In this situation here, where we have long inventory, 190 days, this is more than 6 months of inventory. We want to increase our target ACOS. We want to be a bit more aggressive. And you can define how more aggressive you want to be. Do you want to be, 20% more aggressive than you usually are, or 50%? This is really up to you. You can define that. This actually here, wait a second. If we have 14 days, we want to use the same logic as here. All right, and then we would go down. Now, why did I add a parent here? Because now there comes the interesting part. Let's assume you're advertising all the childs. This is important because if you only advertise one of these three anyways, let's say you only advertise this one, and you're not advertising the other two, well, then it doesn't matter what target ACOS they are getting. But let's assume you're advertising all the three for whatever reason. Could be many reasons. And now let's assume this might have the same margin like this one. Now the thing is that what will happen is before. Let's maybe make this a little higher. So it's kind of what happens in the before scenario, in this scenario here. This ASIN has the highest margin, so it gets the highest ACOS target. Let's assume they're also having the same conversion rate and the same keywords and so on and so forth. This would technically mean that this ASIN gets the majority of the spend. Now, if we adjust our target ACOS based on the days of supply now, then the target ACOS for the ASIN that before had the highest spend is now very low, and the target ACOS for this other ASIN here is now very high. So spend will shift from one ASIN to another. What will that mean? That will mean that this days of supply that you calculate based on the last 7 days will be different. And this will be different as well. So days of supply is very dynamically, it changes every day based on your trailing performance. And if you change your target ACOS and this changes your marketing spend, your days of supply will change immediately the next day. So have in mind, this is a very dynamic system. You have to find a way on how to work with that. You need your margins. These margins need to update. If you want to include your days of supply, you need to understand how many days of supply do I have based on my last 7 days, for example, and how do I update that? Because, if I'm selling 5 on average and now I'm selling 10, this doubles my velocity and this will halve my days of supply and vice versa. So this is very important. Okay. These are 2 very, let's say, basic levers for your target ACOS. One is the multiplier, the most basic lever you can do. The other thing is based on your days of supply at Amazon. This is already advanced because it requires lots of coordination and data. and then also implementation of these targets. Now, let's get to the next level, and let's talk about a few more things. You can also, you don't have to set your target ACOS necessarily on a child ASIN level, and you don't have to define it based on your gross margins. There's a few more things that you can do here, and let's get into this here. So what we can do as well is we can set a goal contribution profit, right? I know my margins before, and now I want to define my contribution profit, meaning my margin after ads, right? And let's say this is 15%. Okay, and let's say it's the same for all of them, 15%. Now, what you need is your organic percentage. Let's say this is 50%, so very simple. And you need a target ACOS that is basically calculated as, as this minus this, right? So your target ACOS is basically the in between, is basically the difference between your margins before and your margins after. That's what you can spend on ads in total. So you have a target TACOS, right? You can also define that, right? You don't have to calculate this, but you can also define it. But this is how it looks like. Now, from a target TACOS, you need to come to a target ACOS again, and this will be straightforward because you have your organics, right? So you just divide it by your organics. So let's say, or let's do maybe 25, 50, 50, 50, and 75. So we have like a little bit of that. So, and then your target ACOS. And then your target ACOS is wait a second. Let me see if that works. That is the wrong calculation. Let me do the other way around. Divided by this. That is also wrong. 1 second. All right, we are back. I needed to look it up into another sheet where I did it. So, guys, here's the right formula that I used somewhere else. So I'm kind of dividing it, but I'm dividing it by target TACOS divided by 1 minus organic to get the PPC percentage. If you have PPC percentage, you could also depending on what you have, either organic or PPC, you divide it by target TACOS divided by PPC percentage, and then multiply it with a 100, but you don't need to do this 100. Obviously, we can also just do it like that, and then we put percentage, whatever you like. The idea here is, if I'm having 25% PPC sales, and this is basically sales, right? If this ASIN is mainly driving on organic sales, my PPC sales are just 25% of it, so just 1/4. My target TACOS on this is 11. That means my PPC can have an ACOS of 44%. And if this organic stays the same, then I will have a target TACOS of 11%, right? Because 44 divided by 1, by 4, 1/4 is my PPC sales, so I divide it by 4. That is 11%, right? So that's kind of the logic here. So we're looking at how much sales are coming through organic versus PPC. And then the higher the organic share, the more I can invest into my PPC based on the target TACOS that I have, right? So you'll see this target ACOS here that looks very much different than it looks here. And the reason for that is very simple. The margin is the same. And my goal contribution profit is also the same. The difference is this one. The difference is the amount of organic that you're already having, right? The more organic you have, the more you can actually invest. And you see here, because a low amount of organic sales, just 25%, the same goal contribution margin on all of them, but I need to go on a lower target ACOS compared to the initial one, just because of the low organic sales. Right, so this is actually another very, very interesting way to calculate your target ACOS, because it looks holistically at your data. Now, I don't want to make this video too long, but you also need to have in mind that this is a parent, and this parent here, not all of them are selling equally. Maybe one is driving the ads and these others are not driving any ads, and they're just benefiting. So for a parent, you might want to do this calculation that you're doing here, not on a child level, but on a parent level. So you want to look at your parent target TACOS, your parent target goal CP, the average organic, and then you'll get a target ACOS for the parent. And you want to apply this to all the childs, for example. Or you mix it up and you want to apply more logics, right? This is just organic target margin based kind of logic, a little bit of inventory, but maybe you want to add some other tactics to this as well, add some multipliers here and there. So there's more to target ACOS in the end than just set 20%, and that is it. And I hope with that you've learned something new today. Stay curious. Bye bye.